Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Now today we'll be making grapefruit sorbet, which is an easy base for making different kinds of flavored sorbets. Basically with sorbet, all you really need to do is combine simple syrup with some kind of juice or other liquid flavoring, kind of like wine, to create a mixture that is between 14 to 18 balm. Now balm is a measurement that is used to measure, I believe it's the density of liquids. In pastry, we use it to measure the density of liquids with sugar in it. So that way it can help us regulate and make sure everything is the same every time we make it so that the sorbet can come up predictable. There is another method we can use. It's a little bit old-fashioned. It's you use an egg and you kind of go by the size of the egg that floats up. And I'll show you how to do that. I don't have a lot of experience doing that because I went ahead and just bought a balm scale. But I'll show you what it looks like once we achieve what we're looking for. I'll drop an egg in so that way you can see how much of the egg is shown. Now when it comes to sorbet, you don't want to go any higher than 18 balm because the sugar mixture won't freeze. If it's really, really sugary, it's just not going to freeze. Another thing too is wine also prevents, not necessarily wine, but alcohol prevents freezing. You know, if you put a bottle of vodka in the freezer, it's not going to freeze. So keep that in mind too if you're going to use alcohol to make your sorbet. Another thing too is if you have a very pulpy or a juice that it's thick, it's not just like liquidy like the grapefruit juice will be. You may have to adjust it as well so that way you still get the same kind of consistency. If you go below 14 balm, it'll freeze, but it'll have more of a granita texture, be more icy, be more like chipped ice or shaved ice, or maybe even like a snow cone. It might still work depending on what juice you use, but basically you want to stay between 14 and 18 balm. You can also flavor your sorbet by steeping in like cinnamon sticks or clove or whatever spice or herb you want to use while it's boiling on the stove. And that's the first step, is to make your simple syrup. Now if you already have simple syrup in the refrigerator, then you're pretty much already ready to go because you can use whatever simple syrup you have to make sorbet. If you have simple syrup in the refrigerator, you make fresh simple syrup for this, you can use it to help you adjust the sorbet later, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So why don't we go ahead and get started. This pot contains 13 ounces of granulated sugar and 7 ounces of water and just a pinch of cream of tartar. And that's a basic simple syrup recipe. Usually it's 1-to-1, but this is just the same 3 ingredients you use for simple syrup. And what we're going to do is we're going to cook it to 225 degrees. And generally speaking, that should give us about 37 balm. Now I'm going to try and make this as specific as I can, give you as many temperature and measurements as I can, so that way you can make the sorbet yourself without having to worry about buying a balm scale. As long as you have an ice cream maker, of course, you should be able to make sorbet. So again, we have 7 ounces of water, 13 ounces of granulated sugar, a pinch of cream of tartar, and we're going to boil it until it reaches 225 degrees. Another thing you want to make sure too is when you put your ingredients into the pot, you want to make sure that there's no sugar clumps on the bottom. So you want to run your hand or a wooden spoon around to make sure all the sugar is pretty much dissolved. It's kind of weird to say it like that, but just so it's fluid, so that way there's no chunks. Because if there's any chunks on the bottom, the sugar is going to cook, caramelize, and burn while the rest of it's just boiling off. So you want to make sure that everything is uniform. You also want to have a lid on top of your pot, because what happens is sugar can crystallize and basically be ruined while you're cooking it. And what I do, there's a couple ways to get around that. Is normally the reason it happens is because there's sugar crystals on the side of the pot, and they fall down and kind of start the crystallization process and just turn the whole thing into a solid block of sugar that for some reason or another won't melt. So you can wash on the sides with a pastry brush and a little bit of water, but you have to do that several times throughout the initial boiling process, and it's not a perfect procedure or a perfect solution. For me, I like to use a lid at first. It takes a little bit longer because you're holding in all the water, so it can't evaporate and go higher in temperature. But what happens is it hits the lid and then it rolls down the sides, so it automatically washes down the sides of your pot. So that way you don't have to worry about fooling with another bowl with water in it and a pastry brush. It's not a big deal, I know, but it's just one more thing you have to wash or one more thing you have to fool around with. This basically takes care of itself. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Let's put this on the stove and bring it to a boil. Okay, so our pot and our sugar with sugar and water has come to initial boiling, and so what's happening now, as you can see, it's the condensation is building up on the lid, and it's rolling down the sides, just like I said it would. So it's washing off the sides. Another thing too, I may have forgotten to mention is the cream of tartar that we use in the recipe for the simple syrup. You don't necessarily need to use it. You can use vinegar, lemon juice, some kind of acid. And what it does is the acid of the cream retarder, it helps prevent crystallization because acid helps prevent crystallization. It's not 100% necessary, but I always use it just as another safeguard. Okay, so once your pot has boiled for a little while with the lid on, let's go ahead and take it off. Now initially, while the water's boiling, you're going to have lots of fast, small bubbles. And as it warms up and gets closer to the desired temperature of 225 degrees, the bubbles are going to get larger and it's going to start bubbling slower. It's not going to be a huge difference in speed, but you're going to notice it compared to this. It's going to be slower. Okay, so we're almost at 225 degrees. The bubbles are still small and really fast. I think I may have underestimated how low the temperature was, but if you go higher, like to caramel, you're going to see that difference in the size of the bubbles. That's because most of this water will have evaporated off, and you'll be left with sugar. And at this point, we still have a lot of water in it, and that's good because if we had too much sugar concentrated, then it wouldn't turn into sorbet. So we're at 225 degrees. Let's go ahead and take this off the stove, or off the heat anyway. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and let it cool off at room temperature. You can stick it in the freezer, or the fridge, or the freezer if you want, so that way it's a little bit quicker. But you want the sugar syrup to be at room temperature while you're measuring it out for the bomb. And that's because when you do your bomb measurements, you have to be at room temperature. If it's too cold, it might you might read it as being a little bit too high. So it'd be like if you were looking for 18. If it's too cold, it might be like 20 when you do the bomb. And if it's too hot, it might be a little low. So if you're looking for 18, or 16, it might actually show up as being 14. So you want it to be at room temperature. And because the grapefruit juice is going to be refrigerated and cold, if the sugar syrup is still not completely at room temperature, between 70 and 75 degrees, then we can use the grapefruit juice to help us get it to that temperature while we're measuring it. So we don't have a whole lot to worry about there. But just remember that you want your sorbet base, once you finish mixing it and everything like that, when you're ready to take the bomb, you want it to be between 70 and 75 degrees or room temperature. Okay, so now that our sugar syrup has cooled down to about room temperature, we can take the bomb. Now this right here is bomb scale. I'll show you when I take it out of it because I know the syrup's a little cloudy. But basically the sugar is reading at 40 degrees bomb, so it's a little bit thicker than I thought it would be. And I still cooked it at about 225, so keep that in mind. So the bomb scale is basically this shape of an instrument, and the one disadvantage of a bomb scale is that it's so tall that you need a really skinny glass, especially if you're not making a huge amount of syrup, in order to take the measurement. Because if you don't want it to hit the bottom of the container, so that way it can sink down to where it's supposed to be on its own. So I've got about 13 ounces of simple syrup to work with. I might lose an ounce here or there because of the tube, but what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and rinse out some more of it by putting the grapefruit juice in the tube. And now I've also set aside 1 ounce of simple syrup, so that way if I do miss the mark and I put too much grapefruit juice in, I have a little bit of simple syrup to come back down with. Okay, so I've added about 5 ounces of grapefruit juice to our simple syrup. Now, remember that since I weighed it out in the tube so I can get more of the simple syrup out, that it might be a little bit off, might be less than that because there was some sugar in there. So think of it as a grapefruit sugar mixture. So we're going to go ahead and mix this up. Okay, so let's go ahead and take the bomb with the grapefruit juice added to the simple syrup. So all you do is drop it in. Let me take the reading, and it's showing at, let's see, about 28 bombs. So we're still a little high, so we're going to add some more grapefruit juice. Okay, so I was able to get the bomb to read at 17 degrees. Now I added in the ounce of sugar that I saved to the side. I also added in 2 ounces of extra simple syrup I had in the refrigerator. So my measurements might be a little bit off for you, but just keep that in mind. That this will probably be right around where you want to be. So go ahead and add this all back into a smaller bowl so we might be able to do the egg trick. Okay, so I went ahead and weighed it out. We've got about 2 pounds of sorbet base here. And then I had 13 ounces of simple syrup I had originally. I added in the 1 ounce I set aside, so we were back at 13 ounces. Then I went to my fridge and added 2 more ounces of simple syrup that I had in my fridge. So I'm going to throw off the measurements for you guys a little bit because I don't know what the bomb reading for that simple syrup was. But I also added in 1 pound, 1 ounce of grapefruit juice. So you should need about 1 pound, 1 ounce of grapefruit juice, maybe a couple ounces less to get to where you need to be if you don't have a bomb scale. Now we're going to go ahead and try and see if I can get the egg trick to work. I wish I had a white egg because it would have been a little bit easier to do this, but it's okay. What we'll do is we'll drop it in. And it's not touching the bottom, so we're good. And if you see what part of the egg is still floating, it's a little bit bigger than a quarter. It's almost maybe like, yeah, actually I would say it is about a quarter in size, like a size of a quarter or a coin, maybe a little bit bigger than a quarter, maybe smaller than a $50 but bigger than a quarter. So if you don't have a bomb scale, grab an egg, drop it in, and it should be about a little bit bigger than a quarter, the size of a quarter, but smaller than a $50. And that should be right about where you want to be for a sorbet base. Okay, so with this in mind, we can go ahead and cool off our sorbet base. We want it to be plenty cold when we put it into the ice cream machine, so that way it doesn't take a long time to set up. So I'm either going to put it in the refrigerator or the freezer and let it cool off. Okay, so once your ice cream base, or your sorbet base, sorry, is nice and cold, and your ice cream bowl is frozen, we can go ahead and add it in. Alright, and we'll just let the ice cream bowl work its magic, and we'll come back in about 10 to 15 minutes, or until it looks like it's ready to go. Okay, so my sorbet has been mixing on the ice cream maker for about 20 minutes, 20-25 minutes. So I gave it a good long time to get nice and frozen. And as you can see, it's starting to have a different kind of texture. It's firmed up, and it's grown a little bit in volume. And since it's trapping air and it's freezing, so it's expanding just a little bit. So I might need more than one of these plastic tubs to put it in. But anyway, it's probably right about where it's going to get to. On the mixer. So I'll probably have to freeze it the rest of the way. Actually, it looks like I should still be able to get into one of the containers since not that much air was incorporated. Should be a little bit more solid than this, so I probably could have let it freeze for a little bit longer, but that's okay. It still has a nice texture. So I'm going to go ahead and freeze this for about 4 hours. Okay, so our sorbet is nice and frozen now, so we can go ahead and start scooping it. It's still pretty soft. I think because maybe my bomb was just a little bit too high. I think I was at 16, if I remember correctly. So you might want to be somewhere around 15 or 14, even for a much more icy sorbet. But actually this has a very nice, smooth, almost creamy texture. It's very easy to scoop. Now granted, I've only been freezing it for about 4 hours, so it's not like I froze it overnight. So once it gets frozen overnight, it might get a little bit harder. But I can't imagine it getting much harder than that. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Grapefruit sorbet. Okay, now I'm not sure if I really remember what I said earlier in the movie, but you can substitute just about any fruit juice or any fruit pulp that you can think of for this recipe. There isn't really any, I can't think off the top of my head of any particular fruit that would inhibit freezing for one reason or another. Like when you make gelatin products, tropical fruits have an enzyme in it which inhibits the gelling process. So like kiwis, pineapples, they won't gelatinize unless you boil them first. And speaking of boiling, remember that the simple syrup we boil on the stove can be flavored with any spice or herb, but you can also go ahead and put your fruit juice right in there if you want. Now, there's a couple things you need to be aware of when you do that, is that fruit sometimes changes flavor when it's cooked. Sometimes the sugars caramelize, or sometimes the flavors get more concentrated, so it almost gets a candy-like flavor. So keep that in mind too if you do that. Also, I just think it's a little bit easier just to do it after you have the simple syrup, because that way the fruit juice is fresh. It's going to you know what it's going to taste like, because it's going to taste just like the juice, just a little bit sweeter. And you're going to have to adjust it anyway for reasons for the bomb. So you might as well just incorporate the fruit juice then. Or you can do both. You have a little bit more of a concentrated fruit flavor on the stove, and then you add fruit on the fruit when you're measuring out the bomb. You can also do fruit combinations. You can do like different kinds of blends. You don't have to do just solely, I just did grapefruit, but you could do a grapefruit and I don't know, lime maybe, or just something like that along those lines. Sorbet is really easy to make and it's really flexible. There's just a lot of different things that you need to be aware of when you're doing it, especially when it comes to the bomb. Remember that we use the egg trick. It's about a quarter in the size when it comes up to the surface, when it's bobbing on the surface, maybe a little bit bigger than that, but smaller than a $half, definitely. So anyway, I hope I gave you enough tips so that way you feel brave enough to venture off and do your own sorbet. Remember, this recipe is available online on my website at www.theauberginechef.com. Thanks for watching, and remember, the Aubergine Chef, demystifying dessert, one recipe at a time.
Chicken.